Hello and welcome to another video. In this one we're going to be talking about Docker, and specifically we're going to be talking about Docker and localhost. Not the localhost inside a container, but the localhost outside a container. I found working with Docker that pretty often you want to access some sort of host service running on your, outside the container on your host machine, such as, like a mail daemon or Nginx or who knows, something running outside of your container. And Docker sort of intentionally gives a container a isolated network namespace. And so sometimes you want to access outside your container. Now you might immediately jump to network host, but there's all sorts of security implications around that, so you don't really want to do that. So I want to show you a more convenient way that's built directly into Docker that does this for you. And actually, I used to work at Yelp, and Yelp had built their own system for this that was very similar, but it turns out there's a way to do this directly inside Docker. First, I want to show you the problem, and then I'll show you how to fix it, and then one quirk about the fix and how you can fix the quirk for the fix. Anyway, let's get started. I actually wrote a Docker file beforehand just because it takes a while to build these, and so I wrote this up. Basically just putting curl into Docker so that I can demonstrate trying to access a service. I actually didn't need CA certificates because we're going to be doing everything from localhost. I have built this using Docker build. So we've got a my curl image from dot, and now we can run that. So do Docker run rmti my curl bash. We'll get curl here. I'm going to start a web server in this other tab. I'm just going to use hp.server. This is very convenient. Basically just serves a directory listing from here. And so we'll be able to look at that. Now, this is running on localhost, well, 0000, which is every localhost, and binding to port 8000. So in theory, I should be able to curl localhost 8000 and access it. And you'll notice that I cannot because I am inside of container. Connection refused. If I'm outside of the container and I run the same thing, localhost 8000, this is what we expect when it works. We'll see a little directory listing that just shows our Docker file and nothing else, because that's the only file that's in this. All right, cool. So does not work. Let's go about fixing it. So Docker run has this argument called add host, and this allows you to add special host names to your host file. You can use this to add special aliases, or I believe Docker Compose uses this to give containers nice names to access them, container to container. But there's a special value that you can pass to add host that allows you to get a loopback host. And conventionally, this is usually written as host.docker.internal. If you're using Docker for Mac, there's a completely different set of networking that's going on there, or Docker for Windows, same thing. And conventionally, Docker for Windows and Docker for Mac both use this name. So this is why it's often useful to do this as a loopback. You also need to tell it the value of this, and the host gateway is the value that we're going to be trying to use here. This is the special value that gets reinterpreted as this loopback thing here. If we run this now, what this is going to do is it's going to add an entry to etc hosts. So if we look at etc hosts, you'll see that we now have this host.docker.internal, and it points at this 172 address. Not 127, that's localhost, 172. This actually refers to the network that Docker sets up to make some of its network magic work. And we'll look more at this later. But this also makes a name that you can just access inside of your container. So if we do curl host.docker.internal 8000, you'll see that we're now accessing the web server that's running outside of the container on this hp.server. All right, cool. So this is working. We've got a loopback. We're able to access network outside of our container that's still running on our host. But there's one problem with this. And the one problem with this is actually this default here, this 0000. What 00000? Well, 4 zeros. I lost count as I started saying it. What that means to me is it's actually listening on all interfaces. And so this allows traffic that's going to come from outside of your box into your box. So, and that might not be what you want. Like in an ideal world, you probably want this server to not be accessible outside of your host. And yeah, you could set up firewall rules and do all sorts of stuff like that, but it's easier to just make that not possible at all. And typically what you would do in order to do that is to only listen on localhost. You can do that with bind 127.0.0.1. Now this server is only listening on this particular IP. And so if I were to do curl localhost 8000, see, it all works great. I can access it here. If I had another machine, I could show you that it's not accessible. But we've broken our Docker container now. This loopback is no longer working, specifically because we changed from 0000, aka listen on everything, to 127.0.0.1, which is just listen on this one localhost IP. But it turns out you can use a particular IP address that will allow this loopback to continue to work. And I have a special command that I have written on this so I can paste because it's a little bit fiddly to type. We are going to inspect the network that Docker gave us, this bridge network. This is the one that comes by default. And we're going to figure out what its gateway IP address is. And you'll notice that this is actually the same number that we get inside of our Etsy hosts here. It won't always be the same number, like especially on Docker for Mac, it's going to be something different because there's a whole Linux virtual machine that runs, and so there's a whole bunch of other funny networking stuff that has to happen to make that work. I believe Docker for Mac actually has a forwarding proxy rather than just normal IP stuff. But anyway, I digress. This is the same IP address here as it is here. It isn't always going to be the same though, so don't just copy it out of Etsy hosts because sometimes it will give you the wrong value. But if we take this value now and we bind our server to this particular IP address, we've restored our loopback invariant here. So in summary, you can add this special host, you can curl it to get outside of your container. If you're listening on 0000, everything is just going to work. However, 0000 is not necessarily what you want to use if you want to not expose your HTTP server to the rest of your network, the rest of your LAN, and if you have port forwarding the public internet. So be careful, I guess, with 0000. But anyway, hopefully you found this useful. If there are additional things you would like me to explain, leave a comment below or reach out to me on the various platforms. But thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.